So the Zeus armor in God of War Ragnarok is actually a lot better than I thought. Granted, you definitely need to make some changes to the Zeus armor, but this build is actually crazy strong and melts through just about anything, probably making it the best build in the game. Obviously, it sort of depends on your playstyle, since God of War Ragnarok is pretty fair in giving you a variety of builds that suit however you want to play, but this Zeus build is easily the strongest. By the way, this video was partially inspired by this comment here because I was thinking about testing this build out already, but I wasn't really sure if I was going to make an entire video on it. So the great part about this Zeus build is that it doesn't really require every single piece of the Zeus armor. You really only need the gauntlets and the waist belt of Zeus, which means that you don't even have to defeat Na to create this, and I'd actually recommend using this build to fight the Valkyrie Queen anyways. This does all need to be done in New Game Plus though, since you can't find the Zeus armor in your first playthrough. The war belt of Zeus is pretty easy to obtain since you don't really need to do anything crazy like a side quest first. You just head over to Vanaheim's Eastern Berry Woods, where you will find a Remnants of Asgard encounter, and if you finish all of those guys off, you'll be able to find the waist armor in the chest, which will grant an additional 20% melee damage, and again, stacks an additional 40% of damage that Kratos will also receive. The gauntlets of Zeus come from over here in Alfheim at the Remnants of Asgard location as well, over here on the map in the Barrens, which you will also need to have completed the Secret of the Sands favor, as pretty much everything here is covered in a sandstorm until that is finished. But after you have completed that, feel free to take out the Asgard remnants, and you will find the gauntlets of Zeus in the nearby chest. For our chest piece, we're going to go with the Berserker Cuirass armor. If you didn't somehow obtain this in your first playthrough, you might have a tough time with this fight, but you'll just have to head right next to where we went for the Zeus gauntlets, over on the east side of Alfheim, and defeat the 3 berserkers that spawn at that location. If you already have that chest piece and use this build, you can defeat these guys pretty dang easily though. I believe this clip here was on Give Me No Mercy. I don't think I was playing on Give Me God of War yet, so it might take some tries to do something like this, but either way, following this build is going to melt everything. So for the Leviathan Axe's Axe Pommel, I'm not too picky with what I use. If I'm not facing a boss, I use the Furious Maul Pommel, but even then, if I am in a boss fight, I still rarely change it, just because I'm not really using the axe other than to get off a runic attack. But a little later in this build, we do go over whether or not you want to push more for a strength build or cooldown. The best pommel for cooldown would be either the Fortified Frost Knob, which also gives you some strength, or the Grip of the Nine Realms, which you can activate in between your runic attacks, like you'll see in a minute. And it also gives a bit of cooldown, runic buffs, and luck, which we use all of those in this build. So for strength, especially when multiple enemies are involved, use the Furious Maul. If you prefer cooldown, which I get into the specifics for when we talk about enchantments, use the Grip of the Nine Realms or the Fortified Frost Knob. Our light runic attack is going to be Hell's Touch because it's extremely quick to get off and stuns whoever you're fighting. Usually, I mean, if you're facing someone like the Valkyrie Queen on Give Me God of War, you're probably not stunning her half of the time with it. For our heavy runic on the axe, again, I don't use it too often unless I'm fighting a bunch of enemies. I used to use Breath of Thamor quite a bit, but it ends up leaving you pretty open for way too long, so I generally use Fog of Fimbulwinter or Leviathan's Roar because they're quicker to get off. The Draupnir Spear is a little more important because it gives us some pretty beneficial buffs that will help us increase our damage. Probably the most important part of the spear being the Mighty Olympic Soroder, which is the handle for it because of its ability of having a moderate luck chance to increase your strength after detonating thrown spears. The light runic attack I switch up sometimes depending on the situation. Hold Your Charge is good because it gets you close to the enemy quickly and is a faster attack in general. I've messed around with the Whisper of the World a bit for that triple berserker fight, but my favorite is still the Thrust of 1,000 Soldiers, especially if you're fighting a single boss, because each of these hits sticks a spear into the enemy. Plus you can just dodge if you want to cancel the runic attack and don't want to sit there for the entire duration. It does sometimes have its downsides because in a fight like Na, she would just act as if I'm not even using it part of the time, but I could generally just roll out of the way if I needed to. But for the heavy runic attack, just like the axe, I don't find it as important. Go with whatever helps you the most, but I like to stick with the Windstorm or the Finger of Ruin. For our Blades of Chaos, this is much more important for this particular style we're going for with this build, since it heavily resembles the Berserker build that we went over before. We'll go over the handles in a minute, but for our light runic attack, I'm using Flames of Anguish because it's really quick to use and stuns whoever is hit by it, but the Rampage of the Furies and Hades Retribution are good options too. So for our handles, there are 2 ways you can go with this, and I recommend testing it out to see which one you like better, but this is going to depend on your enchantments and what you're using in the amulet. You can go with the Luminous Recovery handles, which will benefit greatly with this build because not only does it give some good points towards strength, cooldown, and luck, but hits with the Flame Whiplash, which is a move we're going to be using a lot, will grant a Blessing of Cooldown. Cooldown makes it so that anything that needs to recharge, recharges faster, and we'll use like all of that for this. If you want to venture more into brute strength, you can adjust this a little bit by using the Cursed Empress handles, as they have a low luck chance to increase your strength on any blades hit, plus they add a good amount of points to strength and luck. You really can't go wrong with them. So looking at our enchantments, we're using the Asgard enchantments, which boost all of Kratos' triangle abilities based on his cooldown, and since this build focuses a lot on the Flame Whiplash, that's going to contribute to a good portion of our damage. We've got the Vanaheim set, and then I'm using the Boon of Wrath, Seal of Runic Storm, and the Emblem of the Nine Realms. If you don't want to depend on the Seal of the Runic Storm, which gives a huge damage boost because of the Bifrost, or the Emblem of the Nine Realms ability to slow down time, if you don't want those abilities, you could swap these out for something like the Muspelheim enchantments. Then just don't use your Immolation ability. Just leave it charged and you'll get a damage boost. However, I like the Runic Storm and the Slow Motion from Emblem of the Nine Realms, which is boosted with the relic that slows down time. That relic is the Hilt of Hofud. Using that Emblem of the Nine Realms with the Hilt of Hofud and activating it right after your runic attacks are used, meaning it's activated with the Bifrost, this creates a gigantic storm of damage. Alternatively, if you use the Muspelheim enchantments instead of the Bifrost and Realm Shift buffs, I would recommend the Talisman of Main because it gives you a big melee boost. For our shield, we're sticking with a reliable, the Dauntless Shield. And the Rond of the Nine Realms is perfect for what I'm going for with this chance to slow down time, greatly increasing the damage that we're doing with the enchantments. If you don't want to depend on Realm Shifts too much, again, you could change this to the Rond of Expedition, which gives you a little bit of defense. But what's really good is the cooldown and the Blessing of Cooldown that is granted when interrupting the Blue Ring attacks or parrying, both of which you'll be doing pretty often. So if you went with the Asgard enchantments, this Rond will help. For Rage, I find it hard to beat the Wrath variant because it's using your weapons, which all have buffs from everything for cooldown and building the immolation stuff, but it's the best in my opinion in getting over to an enemy quickly. For someone like Na, the best way to fight her is usually not pushing her unless you're trying to quickly defeat her, since she'll be pushing you most of the time. But during something like her blue ringed attacks, where sometimes she just instant transmissions to the other side of the map and does that attack, I just use my Spartan Rage and charge towards her before she can get it off, which also usually stuns her if she's not too far as well. For Freya, we're using the sword that deals more stun, but you could totally go with the other one. I just like to stun them as much as possible so they don't move. And then Cedar Exhale is going to be the runic summon that we're using, which is a great runic attack. So to use this build, you want to get your 3 runic attacks off immediately to start your Storm of Bifrost. If you decide against using the Storm of Bifrost enchantment, getting these off isn't too important, but during my 2nd or 3rd runic attack, I also hold square to deploy Freya's Cedar Exhale, so that it hits after I'm done with my runic attacks and that Storm of Bifrost is going, and then I'll use my relic to slow down time. Now this is when I'll start to use the Flame Whiplash to deal the majority of the damage. If you don't know how to properly use it, you want to use the Shield Bash by double tapping L1, and as soon as your shield comes back, hold triangle or repeatedly tap triangle. It has to be timed perfectly, and you can mess around with this while you're not fighting out in the open area or right before a fight if you want, but if timed correctly, it will release flames around Kratos, and then you can immediately tap R2 to slap whoever you're fighting with the Blade's heavy attack. By the way, timing with the Na fight is everything. If you're spamming your runic attacks, she will almost always fly up because she knows what you're about to do. But if you're not mashing your buttons and just wait a split second between the 2nd or 3rd runic attack, I could generally keep her from flying up. There's only so much you can do though. So yeah, here's everything in the build again, just in case it got a bit confusing. If this build isn't for you, maybe you don't like being insanely strong with the chance of constantly dying if you're not paying real close attention to incoming damage, you might want to check out something like the Steinbjorn armor build for a much higher defense. It's still a solid build because of how much it tanks damage. You also have the Berserker build that I went over before, especially if you haven't yet completed New Game Plus, or the Lunda build for poison damage that I also have a video on. But that's it, see ya.